right? So it's not about chopping other men down all the time, which is so popular these days, but it's actually about seeing the best in another man and calling him forward, saying, hey, let's figure this out. It's right there. Let's figure this out. Why are you acting like an asshole? It can be that simple sometimes. And what I found in men's groups is many men I know actually have a deep longing for that level of accountability in their life. Because that level of accountability, for the masculine in particular, that is one of the things that feels like love to us. Someone who looks us in the eye and says, I see what you're up to, and I know you can do better, and I believe you can do better, and I'm here to figure it out with you.
Welcome to Rebuilding the Village, a podcast that seeks to explore the causes of modern problems by examining the roots of our metaphorical village through the systems and structures in society that may have been disrupted in the technological and industrial era that we inhabit. Thank you for joining me today.
Sure.
So let's start off. What got you into your line of work as a men's group facilitator, a men's coach?
Absolutely. Yeah, my journey into men's work, unsurprisingly, started with my personal journey, right? So I was born in the Midwest of the States here and had that kind of typical thing I hear from a lot of guys. I had a pretty good childhood. And then as I became a teenager and became more self-aware, I realized, there were some gaps in terms of what I experienced being raised, and specifically in my family. There was like zero emotional connection, physical connection. It was like living under the same house, parents cared for me, but there was just no attunement, no real presence, and very, very little touch. And, I didn't know any better, so I just thought that's how life was. And then lo and behold, I become a teenage boy who has hormones and become interested in women and quickly discover my whole body like locks up. When I'm around women I'm attracted to, I get really anxious. I don't know how to talk to them. And that really kickstarted a journey of what is going on here for me. I'm not able to have these experiences I want that I see friends having. And I generally don't feel good in my body. And so that really kind of launched me into first kind of just studying philosophy and then getting into actual transformational work, and then being very lucky in my mid-20s to get exposed to a men's group. And that, along with a combination of some somatic therapy, just radically changed my life, like totally changed my life, and allowed me to start approaching women and actually having relationships and learning a lot about myself and how I worked. And really, Michael, that just stuck in that, that group started to change more than just my romantic life, started to change how I approached my career, how I approached my finances. And I got so into men's work just because it was changing my life that over time, it's all I could talk about. And then guys started asking me like, hey, can I join your group? And, the group I spent, the majority of my last decade and a half in, we were literally just full. We met in a room, my friend was a therapist. He had a room, and it was just, we couldn't fit any more guys. So at one point I was like, well, maybe I'll start leading some groups here so that other men can start to have some of the experiences I had. And that was really when I shifted from just participating to then facilitating this work. And the more I've done it, the more in love with it, I've honestly fallen. And the more I've just seen, there's been such a monumental shift at the cultural level of, okay, men really need this right now. And I'm more than happy to do my part.
So in a perfect world, young boy would get healthy touch, healthy affection, attention, but also not smothering. What are the variable circumstances that create different types of dysfunctional, dysregulated men in adulthood from childhood? Like, so what do you get?
I'd say there are a couple of different patterns here. The first one I'll start with is probably one I do the most work with these days, not exclusively, but it's the so-called nice guy. If you've ever heard the term nice guy syndrome as
Yes.
popularized by Dr. Robert Glover, a mentor of mine. And so nice guys are often guys that, for whatever reason, often with their mother, but not always, can also be with their father, from a young age, had to learn to attune to their parent rather than their parent attuning to them. So, right, like you said, ideally at a young age, a kid is allowed to just be a kid. We're little narcissists, we're running around, causing trouble, we're experiencing our emotions, and a parent's job is to actually co-regulate the child. So, right, I have a 4.5-year-old daughter. She gets flooded, she gets overwhelmed, she gets upset. I come in, my grounded presence in connection with her helps co-regulate her, bring her back to a place of okay. And in that process, ideally, I'm actually teaching her to know and label what the experiences she's having in her body are, right? Wow, it seems like you're really mad that you can't eat that snack right now, huh? You're mad. And you can see the wiring start to connect for a kid where they're like, oh, wow, that energy, that heat I'm feeling in my body, that's anger. I'm mad. You're right, I'm mad. And that's a positive thing, right, for kids. But for so-called nice guys, oftentimes, that role is reversed. Whereas, it could be all kinds of things, but for whatever reason, the primary caregiver is requiring to some extent the child to attune to them. So the kid quickly learns there's a right way I need to be in order to get love. And so I'm going to start changing my behavior in order to stay in connection with my parent, right? Dr. Gabor Mate, who's an amazing physician that writes a lot about this stuff, he simplifies it into this paradigm that when we're born, we have two needs. Authenticity, which is our need to just authentically express and be ourselves and share what we're feeling, and attachment, right? The fact that humans are quite unique in that we're one of the, really the only animals that come out of the womb completely unable to survive on our own. We actually need someone to take care of us. And so from a very young age, attachment is an incredibly important need, meaning I have to stay connected to my caregiver, otherwise I could actually die. And what happens is when, in order to maintain attachment, we have to give up our authenticity, that's, in my mind, the birth of the nice guy. So it's this man that starts prioritizing the other above self, often has a really hard time setting boundaries, being authentic with their feelings. In the line of work I do, sharing their sexual desire, just anything that might make someone else uncomfortable is often a no-no for the nice guy. And so they're just that really nice guy. They go with the flow, they want to make other people happy, but then they often end up quite frustrated, not getting what they want, resentful in life, and unable to really stand up for themselves. So that's one kind of paradigm. The other one I've often seen is just what happens when there's not a steady, sturdy, present masculine role model in a boy's life in particular. And what tends to happen is, I have seen certainly in myself and in many men I work with, then when we haven't had a masculine role model, it doesn't even have to just be our dad. It could be an uncle, a grandfather, a teacher. When we haven't had someone from a young age that holds that masculine energy that we trust. So for whatever, we trust them. We actually feel safe with them. What I tend to see happens, Michael, is those men then grow up having a very hard time trusting their own masculine. So the part of themselves that just knows what they want to do, makes a decision, sees the big plan, whatever that might be. And that can cause all kinds of problems for different reasons. And then in general, anytime there's a lot of volatility in the house, whether it's physical, emotional, or sexual abuse, or just parents that are constantly arguing, it has a deep impact on us as boys and men, in that also immediately starts to pattern what we then think of as a relationship. And so what we did or did not get modeled for us in our parents' intimate relationship almost always plays out in our own relationship as we grow up. So there's a lot of these different, things that can go wrong as we grow, so to speak. And then just in general, we then spend a large part of our lives trying to repair that early life and early attachment damage.
Yeah. It's you mentioned The Nice Guy. I've read the No More Mr. Nice Guy by Robert Glover. I'm a huge fan of his. I'm hoping to get him on the podcast one day and talk with him. But it was funny reading that book and being like, this guy just like have a candid camera my entire life? Like,
Exactly.
how did he know this? What the hell? And then there is a bit of a, I wouldn't say taboo, but there's a bit of a pushback on a social level towards these types of topics without, I guess, diving into the nuance of why it's important to have these things. Like, sort of just the other day, I had someone on the podcast. It was a woman, it's a marriage coach. And I didn't really get to articulate the response I wanted to, but one of the points she made was that, well, in today's day and age, we don't need men anymore. And the real nuance behind that was like, we don't really need them financially because we needed to, we can get jobs. But below that, it's like, but there are other areas where men are needed. And I think when we put out that blanket statement into the world saying, no, we don't need you anymore, it's like, okay, specify a little more. It's like, we need you you have a different role now, but there is a purpose for you in society. But when you put that blank statement out, that's where you start getting overreactions, red pill movement, MGTOW, things like that, that people are just basically saying, well, screw it. If you don't need me now, I'm just going to go start causing trouble elsewhere. And then how this starts to compound into a larger and larger scale. I notice also, I think if you start to look at older generations, when I say older, I mean like mostly post-World War II. There's this reluctance to, I wouldn't say accept responsibility. It's more like acknowledge the existence of these dynamics causing problems on a societal level is a way to put it. That people are just reluctant to sit down and have the discussion to say, like, big word I hear a lot is something like trauma. And I heard it explained well. It was like, well, there's big T and little t. It's like big T is like you got hit by a car. You just like, you broke your arm. Little t is like, well, your father didn't give you a hug ever. Like your mother was smothering so your mom didn't love you enough? Your father didn't? It's like, well, yeah, once or twice, okay. But for 10, 15 years growing up from zero to teenage years, that does have an impact on you.
Totally.
And it's been fascinating in my own journey to learn about this stuff and then to keep going back like, oh, it started when I was 15. Wait, no, it was 10. Wait, no, it was 5. Wait, oh my, and it was my grandparents. Holy crap, it was their grandparents.
Yeah.
And seeing this massive interconnected web of problems on a multi-generational level that a lot of people are reluctant to sit down and see the threads through because it's so complex. It is somewhat difficult to genuinely prove. It's not like a science or a math equation we could just do a proof of and show this is what happens when you're ignored as a child, because there's a lot of pushback in that direction. But we're also living in a very bizarre time where we have the opportunity to live lives very disconnected from each other and still survive.
Totally.
It's a strange one that like previously it's like, no, we need you to work on the farm with us, we need you to go out hunting with us, like, so we're gonna be here as a group doing stuff. This is the original men's group. This is the OG men's group. Was we're going to go hunt a woolly mammoth together. All the guys are going to go out together and do something. So if you have problems at home, you're stressed out about something, we're going to be here to talk about it and to help you. And now everyone's just scattered everywhere. Even though there's social media for communication purposes, it's not even close to the same. Yeah. This is what's funny. I'm reading some prompts and notes I made about this. And every time I read this, it's getting better, but I still feel this back of my mind feeling of like, the question of like, what is the healthy masculine? And you mentioned before, like, if we didn't have a healthy masculine figure, I could still hear like people I've met, angry hyper feminists or whatever, like, like woke people. Now, not to say there's no valid points in there, but look, we'll start with that. What would you define as the healthy masculine for a child growing up?
Yeah, absolutely. So the healthy masculine energy, right? Part of what is so challenging for so many of us men right now is there is a lot of emphasis on what men should not be. The toxic masculine here's how men have shown up in the world and caused damage in relationships, to children, to women, to the financial system, to the earth. And count me in for yeah, it's necessary to have these conversations, right? It's a good thing that culturally we're pointing out that, yeah, hey, left to its own devices, the pathological masculine, so I don't use toxic, I say pathological, which just means it's grown in the wrong way, can be very damaging. And almost always what that is when a man is totally disconnected from his heart, which means his ability to actually feel impact on others. Now, the healthy masculine, which I, will happily take in a stance here for, that we don't need less of it in the world. We actually need quite a bit more healthy masculine in the world right now. And masculine energy, this can be controversial in some sense. Just like feminine energy, it doesn't have to do with what sex you were born. We all have both of these energies inside of us. Everybody does. Some tend to get more restored in one energy than the other and kind of have more of a home base. But I have an incredibly powerful feminine side. My wife has an incredibly powerful masculine side. And masculine energy, in a sense, it's the part of us that simply notices and witnesses what's happening around us. That's it, right? It's the part of us that is aware of what is happening. And in a sense, because of that, it tends to be identified more with kind of perspective, witnessing, seeing, being less in our experience and more kind of noticing it. The primary masculine practice that's popular in the world, kind of globally at this point, is meditation. It's, can I witness my thoughts? If I am seeing my thoughts, I am not my thoughts, right? If I'm like, hey, there's a thought I'm having, suddenly I'm not just identified with that thought, I'm identified with something bigger. And in essence, that's kind of the masculine part of all of us. Now, how I say this shows up in an actual person in a healthy way comes from three different things that all need to be online. First, we have to be deeply connected to our bodies and present in the moment. So directly connected to our felt body experience, so the sensations we're having in our body in the moment. This is very key. So actually present in the moment. And then you pair that with being grounded, right? So grounded means I'm actually here. I'm anchored in the moment. I'm not just floating away in my thoughts or my head, but there's a solidness, right, to this type of energy. It's like here, right now. So healthy masculine energy is deeply grounded and present and connected to its body in the moment. From there, it's also connected to the heart. So healthy masculine, when we're in that, we're grounded in our body and we're open in our heart space, meaning we're able to attune to other people, to the environment around us. We're actually feeling. Now, why this one comes after being grounded in our body, Michael, is emotions tend to start as sensations in our bodies. So if we're not connected to our body, it's much harder to be connected to our heart, to our feelings. Mm-hmm. But this is very important. Just as key for a man to be grounded in his body, connected to a sense of power, is he's connected to his heart and open and sensitive. And this is, can throw some people for a loop, but the most powerful men I know are deeply sensitive, meaning they are feeling moment to moment, whether that's relationally with a partner, with their child, or if you can imagine, a great martial artist. They're actually highly attuned. They are feeling very deeply in their moment, their body, the body of who they're with, what's going on in the environment. And because of that, they're able to respond, right, quickly in the moment. But it's that level of openness that's so key. And then the third piece in my definition of healthy masculine is we have a deep and wide awareness. So literally, our attention goes to what's deepest and most important in the moment while holding the biggest picture it can. So we might be in a relational moment, let's say arguing with our partner, and we notice there's where I say this, you say this, and it's our capacity to actually say, hey, I notice right now we're having that same argument we always have that leaves you feeling sad and me feeling frustrated. And what I'm realizing might be the best thing for us to do right now is I'm going to go take a walk around the house, take a deep breath, and then I want to come back and reconnect because I love you, right? So it's that deeper, like what's the most important thing in this moment? It's not just getting distracted. And when all three of those things are kind of firing, the healthy masculine presence is absolutely transformative to its community, the people around him, in terms of capacity to create safety, stability, bring deep presence. And then how I'll kind of tie this all together here in my little rant is energetically then what I say, I kind of call this the father energy we all need. It's just this very simple phrase of when all that is happening in a masculine figure, what they're able to do, the presence they're able to bring to whoever they're with in particular or a situation is, well, let's figure this out together. And so again, another nutrient I didn't get, many men I work with didn't get, women too, frankly, from a father figure is this sense of, hey, something's not working in your life, right? You failed this test, or you're having a big reaction, or you're having trouble with X, Y, or Z. Rather than shaming you for that, I'm going to stand here with you and we're going to figure this out. What could we try differently next time? Maybe we could work on this. Maybe we could do this. I know you can do it because I'm here with you. And it's just this very steady presence that says, hey, when you get dysregulated or overwhelmed or have a problem, I'm going to be here to help you navigate it. So let's figure it out. Mm-hmm. And that is an energy I think the world could use a tremendous amount more of right now, frankly. So when people say, we don't need men, I would argue, no, we actually need a lot of masculine energy because that is one of its great gifts is I'm going to be here with you in this and let's figure this out. And we can then move forward in a sense. So those three primary energies of being connected to our bodies, grounded and still, open in our hearts, sensitive, attuned, and then aware with our consciousness kind of aimed at what's the most deep, important thing in the moment while holding the widest context creates a really powerful force in men. And it's not just a theoretical thing. This is what blew me away about men's groups as I started spending time around men who had cultivated these energies. I actually felt it in my body, meaning the state of their nervous system would impact my nervous system and allow me to relax. And there's a sense of, wow, I feel safer around this person. And that's a pretty huge gift.
One thing that popped into my mind was this is a book. It's called, you might be familiar with it. It's called King, Warrior, Magician, Lover.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Yeah. And they talk about how we're not in a patriarchy. We're in a purarchy, I think it's called. And the word meaning like run by boys, not by men.
Sure.
And so the two things I would think to ask is what is the healthy feminine? Mm-hmm. And then in terms of toxic masculine, how did we get to this point as a society?
Sure. So yeah, healthy feminine, I think is maybe not what people always think it is. To me, it's like a radical devotion to love. Like, so healthy feminine, there's a lot of things we can talk about in terms of, feminine energy being more associated with opening, softness, energy, connection. But there's also a devotion to love, and it can be quite radical, right? In the sense of not taking shit. Like, hey, there are kids suffering here and we need to do something about it. So that healthy feminine, it is an orientation, towards love. We could say, at least in my lineage, again, these are just terms that are useful until they're not, that the masculine energy inside of all of us is a little more oriented towards consciousness. So awareness, being aware of what is. Feminine energy is a little bit more about being inside of what is. So being in our experience. So the content of whatever it is. And that tends to be where we feel love, where we feel connection, where we feel part of something. And so healthy feminine energy is able to transmit, and feel that love, that energy. And in my mind is, quite honestly, like what makes life worth living. The things that in your body in the moment, you're like, wow, that tends to be some kind of feminine coming through, whether it's a beautiful sunset, an embrace of a lover, a sweet note from a teacher, whatever that could be. With either of these, there's healthy versions and unhealthy versions. There's mature versions and immature versions, right? And that's part of kind of what we're wrestling with as a culture right now, in particular, that for a large part, the immature versions of the masculine have kind of been running the show. And what I mean by that is, there's been a lot of men throughout history who have been deeply connected to their bodies, their power, their sexual drive, their desire to have to conquer, so to speak, but it's been disconnected kind of from the heart and the deep awareness that I was talking about. And those boy men, as we might say, do cause a lot of damage in the world and create these conditions that are both damaging for women, but also for men, right? Men are actually as hurt by boys running the show as anyone else, in terms of all these expectations that so-called boy men then create as to, what a man is supposed to be, which, kind of loosely we call this term the man box, that there's this idea that there's a box you have to fit inside of as a man. And if you don't, you're not a man, right? We can think of all the slurs that people call, particularly men call other men in that sense. And if you're not checking off these boxes, you're not a man. And that actually hurts men, because one of the primary ones I see are men shouldn't be vulnerable. They shouldn't show weakness. If they do, they're X, Y, or Z. And, the paradox of what I've seen in my life is, again, the most powerful men I have met in my life, as I say in some of my work, they feel everything. Real men feel everything. They don't turn away. They don't shy away from emotional pain. They're actually able to turn right towards it. And for a lot of us men, because of this whole paradigm, we're taught that you should never show weakness, you should never be vulnerable, other men are your competition. Men, we have these emotional experiences that we don't know what to do with. So grief, sadness, anger, disgust, whatever they might be. And because we don't know what to do with them, and we haven't been taught what to do with them, guess what we do? We try to drink our emotions away, smoke our emotions away, sleep with women and ejaculate our emotions away, video games, food, you name it. I think men are particularly susceptible to try to numb out or change their bodies because they don't want to feel what's actually present in their bodies. And, when you're young, that can kind of work. But, you start to hit your 30s and 40s, life starts to catch up. That kind of chi reserve of energy isn't quite there. And what we notice, and what I certainly notice in my work, is men start to actually hurt. Their bodies hurt. Their bodies start to fail. They have autoimmune disorders. And, you stick with that long enough, and there's a reason men tend to die faster. And oftentimes it's because we're not actually taking care of ourselves, because no one taught us how. And this whole paradigm is part of what's unraveling right now of, wow, when those man boys are in charge of the world, it doesn't work, right? We've just seen the degradation it can cause all around. And part of what we're being asked to do now, I think, is integrate this healthier masculine that is, again, grounded, present, aware, attuned, sensitive, to be able to help, make sure there's a future for us and our kids. And in my book, the feminine has been doing a kick-ass job. They're trying to hold it together, and they need help, right? They actually need the help of men. And we are particularly suited to be the ones to step in and call forward other men and say, hey, what you're doing is not cool there. That's not right for you to be treating your partner like that, or X, Y, or Z. I think you can do better. And right, so it's not about chopping other men down all the time, which is so popular these days, but it's actually about seeing the best in another man and calling him forward, saying, "Hey, let's figure this out." Right? It's right there. It's right there. Let's figure this out. Why are you acting like an asshole? It can be that simple sometimes. And what I found in men's groups is many men I know actually have a deep longing for that level of accountability in their life. Because that level of accountability, for the masculine in particular, that is one of the things that feels like love to us. Someone who looks us in the eye and says, "I see what you're up to, and I know you can do better, and I believe you can do better, and I'm here to figure it out with you." To us, that's like, wow, someone actually cares, as opposed to just letting me go off and do whatever. And that kind of accountability can be so, so powerful. And again, we need a lot more of it. This idea of, a healthy masculine energy in the world, and discovering, I think part of what our job as men is right now by embodying this energy is to actually teach those around us what it is this energy can bring, right? So some people, like the woman you talk to, like, we don't need men. She might not know, right? She may just not have experienced in her life what a grounded masculine presence could bring to her family, her culture, her whatever that might be, because she's never experienced it. Because the frank truth is, men are a little behind in our development, right? We were kind of on top for a long time. Things started to shift, in the women's lib movement in the 50s and 60s, and this is all great, super positive stuff. Women were liberated from the role of child giver. Like, that's all you could be. That's what you do. They were liberated from that, allowed to go out into the workforce, to have their own identities, cultivate meaningful work and purpose in the world. And that's great. I want more of that. And men are a little farther behind. Our movement didn't really start quite as strongly in terms of, for a lot of men, one of the big shifts of the last 50s and 60s has simply been, we're allowed to have an interior world. We're allowed to have feelings. We're allowed to be expressive. Like, that is super edgy. It still is for a lot of men, right? That, wow, I'm allowed to cry, and that doesn't make me less of a man. No, not at all. But this work for men, in a sense, the men's movement in a lot of ways didn't really start till the 90s. So we're like decades behind, actually. And it's starting to shift now. Like I said, when I got into a men's group in my 20s in the mid 2000s, you say that phrase, people are like, "What are you talking about?" Maybe depending on where you're at in the country, people would be like, "Oh, is that a church group, like a Bible study group with men?" That was kind of maybe the only type of men's group that was really out there. But now, you go out there and men's work has really exploded, and men's groups are showing up everywhere, I think, because the movement is maturing and men need it, right? We need to be guided by other men, and we need to be shown, how to be in our bodies. This is one of the things that really, like you're kind of talking about. I think, long term, we're going to look back at this weird, very strange industrial blip of culture where, my parents certainly, around that generation, I was like kind of coming in at the tail end of the Dr. Spock generation. The prevailing wisdom was, if your child is crying, let it cry it out in the crib. That's going to create a strong child. That is never in the history of humankind ever how children were handled.
Yep.
Right? Just because of the nature of tribal living and whatnot, kids were a baby was basically held from the time it was born. Someone was always holding that child. Could be uncle, auntie, someone else in the tribe. This whole idea of just like leaving a kid in its crib to cry it out, totally barbaric. And we're like swinging past that now, but there's a lot of things that were kind of wedged in that time period we're trying to now undo the damage of in some pretty significant ways that have impacted how both men and women have grown. And like, again, many of the men I know, part of that was, once the Industrial Revolution happened, the whole idea of factory work and office work eventually started. And what that did is it took dad out of the family system. So instead of dad working at home on the land in the shop, Dad had to go off every day.
Mm-hmm.
And because Dad was off every day, young boy in particular was more and more through time raised by women. And then the industrial schooling system came up, and that certainly changed, but again tends to predominantly be female teachers. And then the whole idea of rites of passage, all of that stuff disappeared from our culture. So young boys, a lot of them are still boys, even though they're in a man's body, because they never were guided through the process of maturing in their culture, particularly led by other older, wiser men. And I think that's part of what the men's work movement is starting to try to plug back in. That's like every man I know, Michael, I mean, they want to do good in the world. They want to be a service. They want to have a purpose. They want to help others. And if they're in pain, it's often because they don't know how to do that. They're sitting there. They come to me because they're like, I don't know how to be. I don't know how to be. I want to be something, but I don't know. No one's ever showed me. I was just left in front of the TV and, taught to go to school, but it doesn't work, right? So I don't know. I kind of rambled there. Hopefully that answered your question.
It had a couple of questions, and it's also similar points that I've come across in my own research, learning. I'm hopefully myself going to be within the next 3 to 6 months, either joining or starting or both of a men's group, because I definitely realized I needed it myself.
Yeah.
There was something, the accountability piece is a funny one that you mentioned, like men just crave that accountability piece. And I think it's multi-layered, where it's essentially kind of getting approval from an older, more respected figure in your life, more often than not a man, of what you're doing, if you're on the right path, or you're not on the right path.
It makes a difference. Like they've actually done research. And the interesting thing is, in terms of getting healthy masculine energy in our lives, it doesn't have to be quite as persistent an energy as healthy, loving, kind of connected feminine energy, meaning that it's pretty wild. Like literally the course of a boy's life can be changed by just a single interaction or two by a healthy masculine presence, a coach, a teacher somewhere, an uncle somewhere, someone who just stepped in and said, hey, I see you're struggling and I know you can do it, and what's your plan? Like a small dosage can make a huge, huge difference, because we do crave that. We want to know we're on track, essentially, right? That's kind of the feeling. We want to know. Most men I know have no problem putting in the effort, the struggle, the learning, the growth, the persistence, if they know it's going to pay off, meaning they feel like there's a sense of direction. Like, okay, yeah, if I keep doing this. It's when men don't have that connection to the deep sense of direction, in a sense of like, I don't know, is this the path? Am I doing it right? Am I doing it wrong? That they flounder and kind of just end up wandering, right? With no clear sense of direction. It's why, I think just the whole idea of like apprenticeship and mentorship, I mean, right there in the word mentorship, right, is such a big thing for guys. Like we crave that feeling of being along a path and moving towards something, and not having that, frankly, is one of the biggest sources of depression I see in men, is when they don't have a sense of direction in their lives.
Purposelessness. Yeah. I've been, I wouldn't say grappling with this. I've been more observant over the years of my own patterns, my own behaviors. One thing that popped up multiple times was when I was always talking about exercise and fitness, that I still have a very hard time working out just for me.
Yeah.
That if somebody said, you should work out because it's healthy, it's good for you, you want to live a long life, like this, nothing really fires up. Somebody says to me, like, yeah, you should work out because that cute girl over there really likes nice biceps. Like, I'm doing 10,000 bicep curls tomorrow. Holy shit, let's go. But I realized I used to do crew rowing back in college about 15 years ago. You wake up at 4:30 in the morning every day, go drive to the water for 45 minutes, sit on the water for like freeze your butt off, and then sweat your butt off, and then freeze your butt off again, and then go about your day. And it was funny that every single day you wake up, you're like, I do not want to go so badly, but I'm going to feel like an even bigger piece of shit if I let my teammates down. Because I know they're probably there right now, also not wanting to be there, feeling like crap. And there was something about like this bigger than you mentality of people expecting you to bring your best because they know you can.
Yeah.
And then you start to inspire other younger guys and girls on the team to try to like pull forth the best parts of them. And it also shows you what you're capable of. Like so many things you didn't think you could do. A lot of times, even with rowing, we would do 2,000 meter sprints basically, which is just, if any guy wanted to know the closest thing we can approximate as a man to childbirth, do a 2,000 meter sprint on a rowing machine and tell me how much hell you going through. But at the same time, once you get through it, you look at everything else in your life and you're like, nothing's even close to difficult right now. This is all a joke compared to that. I didn't know I could even do that. This is insane. But having some kind of circumstance, in this case it was the team, but also, like a men's group of some sort, to say, are you still on the right track? And I know I find myself a lot of times that if I know there's something I have to get done that somebody in the future is going to be asking me about, it's way more motivating to do it even if I don't want to. Because I'm like, I don't want to let that future version of myself and that person down. Versus if I'm just by myself and nobody's really paying attention, it's much easier to just say, I'm just going to say Netflix and video games and just eat Doritos and drink crap food all the time. But yeah, I've seen a lot of men along that path. And I've also seen, I do massage therapy for a living, and I've had a lot of people, a lot of women in particular, come through my practice who will talk about their husbands or their sons. And the funniest thing I always get is, how are they this old and they don't know how to do this, or they're still immature, they're still this, they're still that. And I always have to remind them, like, age is just a number at this point. Like, you could be dealing with a 50-year-old 5-year-old. You could be dealing with a 70-year-old 15-year-old that they didn't get, like you mentioned before, that trials, that rites of initiation, that passage into manhood at some point in some form, or they just had a very toxic home dynamic and it's still echoing into their day-to-day life in some way. And we start to really critique people, criticize them. You don't meet them where they are, and then help them grow up past that point and acknowledge it and get through that. And then then you take that one guy, turns into 10 guys, turns into 100 guys, turns into the Red Pill movement, turns into MGTOW, turns into angry people posting on Reddit forums about how much women suck. Or my favorite is when I get guys who are, women are all crazy. And I'm like, no, every woman you keep finding, because you find the same woman over and over again because you have some issues going on internally that's attracting them, whether you realize it, are crazy. When in reality, they're just reflecting the parts of yourself that you haven't dealt with yet. And if anything, if you did deal with them, you wouldn't be, if you were able to absolve or rectify those issues, ground yourself, you wouldn't be attracted to this woman. You wouldn't be attracted to them in the first place. You'd be finding someone else. And ideally, what it might do is it might then call out the best in other people, or it's going to defer the ones who are not ready, but it's going to pull forward the ones who are saying, like, oh, you're grounded, you're this, you're that, you make me feel a lot better. Reminds me of, I think it was like a TikTok or something like that. And it was so funny. It was a woman posting about how she doesn't know what to do with her anger because her boyfriend is always so grounded and never gets mad. And she's like, what am I supposed to do when I can't get into a fight with him? Because he's so rational and so logical and stuff. Like you said before, I realize this is not a good thing. Let's go for a walk. I'll come back in a few hours. We'll talk about it. It's becoming more commonplace. It's good to see more people recognizing these issues in society and then finding ways to do it. So as far as the men's group goes, how would you recommend guys find them? Is it better online, better in person? Does it really not make much of a difference? I know I don't think, I have a couple near me. I live in New York on Long Island. I don't know how the quality is. I've been trying to go to a couple of them, but I've also reached out to a few of the bigger ones. And they basically said, we don't have anybody out there, but if you're interested in starting one, I'm like, oh, cool. I'll give it a try, see how it goes. How would guys go about finding one or getting into one or creating one?
Yeah, totally. I think in terms of the in-person versus virtual, there's pros and cons to both, right? Ultimately, there's nothing quite like being in the same room with some guys and actually sharing physical space with each other, because there's just certain things you can bring to that you can't do virtually, namely touch and connection and just the feeling of being in the same room. And that's incredible when you get to experience it, right? But, geographically, not every man has access to that. So, it is really amazing right now that because of technology like this and Zoom, more than ever, we can kind of create these virtual groups that link men together from all across the world, frankly, or from regions where they just don't have access. The places I happen to live the last 15, 20 years of my life, I got lucky. There's kind of transformational hubs, the places where men's groups show up. So I always had the option to, get into in-person groups. But, particularly leading my work through COVID, learned pretty quickly that, wow, yeah, actually, it's quite effective, though, to do them virtually. You can get quite a bit out of a virtual session, even if you're not in the same room. So if that's all you got access to, don't fret. You can get a lot of positive stuff out of that. And yeah, the thing with finding a men's group is, it's kind of like dating or finding a therapist in a sense. There's so many variations out there. Part of what you got to discover is like, what am I actually needing and what feels good to me? Because some men's groups are going to be focused more on accountability. Some men's groups are going to be focused more on men tend to gravitate this way if they're not careful, talking about things and ideas and concepts and philosophies. Some men's groups are going to be focused more on practice and embodiment. So we're going to actually get together and do practices with each other, whether it's something like Kundalini or Qigong or different meditative practices. Some are going to be about support and, helping each other feel more deeply. These things are all available. A good group, in my mind, is going to have a little bit of all of them, right? It's going to have, you're going to dabble in all of these different things. And finding one, can start with these days, again, depending on where you live, hopping on meetup.com or Eventbrite, or just doing the old Google, men's groups near me. You may find something, you may not, to be frank about it. If you do find something and it's an open group, meaning it's a drop-in group, you can come in and experience it. You just got to go. You just got to go if it's whether it's virtual or physical, and just see, how does it feel for me to be here? Do I feel connected? Do I feel open? Does whoever's leading it, is there a solid structure? Do I feel like, we're not just showing up to talk? Because it's pretty easy to, again, kind of devolve into that without a lot of structure. And then, if you like how it feels, talk to them about what it might mean to join long term. Mm-hmm. Some groups, are ongoing. Others are more like short-term programs. Like, it's going to be, hey, 3 months, we're going to meet every other Monday, Again, you kind of have to discover what's going to be right for you. I personally, and this is something I'm moving towards supporting men in, I'm a very strong proponent of the power of creating and owning your own group. I've joined programs, I've done other things, and there's a lot of value in that, yeah, someone else provides the structure, you just show up, you're guided through something. A lot of men are busy and they don't want to deal with the stress of organizing or planning or all that. But having been part of 2 very long-term groups myself, one for 14 years in LA and one here in Colorado that I was actually in my 20s and just rejoined, that are what I call peer groups, meaning it's not a men's work facilitator or anyone who's like, we're not paying someone to be part of the group. We're a group of guys that decided we want this in our lives. So we're going to put energy into this container. So we created it and we rotate leadership in these groups. To me, those have been the most potent I've been in because they're ours, right? Nobody's telling us what to do. No one can tell us to stop meeting. Like, we own it. And there's a certain accountability that comes from ownership in my experience of like, wow, this is ours. If I'm not getting something out of it, I can't just complain. I have to actually bring something to the group to say, hey, I want us more connected in this way, or can we focus on this? And those tend to have, for me, those have been the most long-term, meaning, these are the men deeply woven into my life, right? Like these are the guys I call at 3 in the morning, if there's trouble, so to speak. Yeah. And they show up, right? We are actually a band of brothers in that sense. That takes a little work though. You got to find men, you got to learn a little bit to create a container, but ultimately, to me, the only way this movement's going to take off is by decentralized groups like that spinning up as fast as possible in as many places as possible. Yeah, that can adapt to their kind of local environments. Then there are kind of some of the probably the biggest name in the space, which, they've had some growing pains the last couple of years, but would be Mankind Project. Most people have a Mankind group in their local area. They're probably the most predominant, like having chapters all around the world, and experiences you can go through. Again, you just have to kind of try it out. They have a weekend training, their new warrior training, that you just have to see. Does this feel like it's the fit for me? It is for some people. It's not for every man. And then there's just endless guys like me online these days, starting groups and creating programs that you can come through and experience things. So, but it really does come down to what I would say is you don't have to wait. And, the group I was in LA for 14 years started because me and two men decided, hey, I want this in my life. I had moved out there, had left my other group, and I was like, I need this. I can feel I am not as effective a man in the world without this container. And so I just started with two guys. Hey, we're going to meet this time, this place, this many hours. And we committed and started meeting there. So then as we started interacting with other guys in our community, we had something to invite them into. And not every man responded to that. Some guys would come, sit in for a meeting or two and be like, no, this isn't for me, or I can't actually commit to twice a month, whatever that might be. But over time, within a year or two, we had a closed container of 8 men, that lasted basically until some of us moved away, and then the rest of the group still meeting. But that level of depth and persistence and guys who really wanted to be there, I think is super key. So, there's more and more trainings coming out online of how to start a group, frameworks for starting a group. They can really help if you've never done it before and never experienced one. But it really just comes down to that commitment of a couple of guys, So if you can't find something in your area, but you have an intuition, there's 1 or 2 men you've maybe, had a little bit deeper a conversation with on a lunch break or after a sporting event or something, I would invite them. I'd be like, hey, here's what I'm thinking of doing, and here's why I'm thinking of doing it. Do you want to come check it out? And maybe we could create something together. And out of all the things I've done, and I've done a lot of transformational things, I can tell you, Michael, this is the stuff I throw all my weight behind because it's, for me, been the most transformative. Because it's not just a weekend workshop. It's woven, as I call it. My men's group is like my heartbeat. Every 2 weeks, I'm checking in at a deep level and really getting my pulse in my life and getting it reflected to me by other men who care about me. And, as I say, will support me when I'm down and will definitely hold me accountable if there's something I need to move forward in my life or shift or change, right? Hey, I notice you've been complaining about that job for 6 months. Like, are you just going to complain about that, or what are you going to do? Because either you're going to change your job or we don't want to hear you complain about it. That kind of tough love in a sense. And it's like, okay, yeah, wow, great. I hear you. And I don't know how to do that though, guys. I'm scared. But then they help, okay, what if you tried this? What if you tried this? Da, 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 da. Yeah. And that's really the beauty of a group. So in short, I don't have a magic formula for it other than start looking in your area, Meetup, Eventbrite, Google. The other thing is, if you don't have a lot of guys in your local community yet, even though, I certainly am a proponent of long-term groups, you can go to men's work weekends or retreats, primarily because then you're going to meet guys who are really interested in the work and who might be interested in starting a group with you, or might already have a group you can join or something like that. Because what you're looking for is this kind of population of guys who are ready for this kind of support. And I'm not there yet, but I will be creating a kind of, how to start your own men's group training next year that I'm hoping to fill some of these gaps.
Has there been, I'm curious, like two moments I could think of in your work with men's group where there were some, like, I want to say good in a moment that made you better and a bad moment that made you good. I'm trying to think of how to word that, but times when examples of times you can remember where the men's group kept you on track when you were falling off track, or you were already on track and you got even better because of them.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I can't tell you how many times the only reason I got something done or moved a ball forward in my life was because I had committed to it in my men's group. And, I wish I could say, I was totally on top of things all the time. But sometimes, one of the groups I met in for 14 years would meet on Monday nights. at 8 p.m. Pacific, and it would be, 6. And I'd be like, oh man, I said I was going to do this thing and I haven't done it. I got to do it now. And I would cram, in 90 minutes to like send some emails or create some documents or apply for some things. And it worked, right? It moved the ball forward for me. My move in my 20s from Colorado to Los Angeles was actually prompted by my men's group as well. I had an interest in film and pursuing an artistic career, and it was something I was stuck around. And they were the ones that were like, man, if you want to do this, you're probably not going to do it here. Like, this isn't the place for it. And so I totally uprooted myself and dove in to a whole new industry and learned so much about myself in the process just because of my men's group, right? They really kind of pushed me in that sense in a pretty healthy way. And honestly, one of the most powerful things I frequently get is just feedback from men around when I'm not grounded. So just within an individual meeting, if I'm checking in with something, they're just like, yeah, man, you really don't feel grounded to me. And then I'm like, no, what are you talking about? And then almost inevitably it's like, oh, fuck, you're right. Right. And then I can actually feel it like, wow, I've been resisting something or staying up in my head or, whatever that might be. And those moments are pretty life-changing for me, very, very life-changing in a sense. To one of the things I've seen, again, there's many ways we can use a men's group, but one of the most powerful things I've seen is other men guiding men deeper into their experience in the moment. Like, that is one of the most powerful things I've seen in group, where a man's, I'm talking about something, and then guys just lovingly are like, yeah, and I hear you saying that, and it doesn't really match what I'm feeling of you right now. What do you mean? And, and then boom, I know you're right. I'm actually so sad right now. And then grief pours out, right? Or anger pours out, or, for a lot of nice guys, like, yeah, I noticed you saying that, you're mad at your boss and you're smiling. Do you realize you're smiling? And they're like, no, what are you talking about? And it's like, yeah, no, you're smiling. And they're like, holy shit, I do this all the time.
Yeah.
Right. I try to make myself more friendly. So yeah, I mean, countless examples of that. Frankly, man, sometimes just being held by other men in some of the most challenging moments of my life, I've just turned into a puddle of just tears and snot when I've just been totally overwhelmed by choices I made or things that happened to me. And coming out of that has been super transformative. I left a long-term relationship because of my men's group that, was safe in a lot of ways, but, I was hurting her and she was hurting me. And it was because I had a group to go to. Literally, I had a group to go to was the thing that allowed that to happen for me. Because I just had a place to show up on the other side of what was, one of the most challenging shifts I made in the world. And since being in a group, man, I make more money. I got married to a hot wife. I have a great kid. I attribute a lot of that to men's group. Again, because it's, for me, in my cadence, every 2 weeks, I'm feeling the pulse of my life and where I'm on point and where I'm not on point and where I need to get more on track. And sometimes also where I need to just slow down and not burn myself out and realize and get some feedback of like, hey man, you seem a little fried. You might want to take some time off. And like, no, I'm fine. And it's actually, no, I'm not fine. My body's in pain or whatever that might be. So I am eternally grateful for the many incredible men I have in my life that have, totally transformed it. Particularly becoming a father was a huge one for me, and being part of groups with older men who had already done that journey, whose kids were kind of out of the house. Man, I can't tell you how many times I'd be coming in worried about something or anxious about something, and just having another man just say like, yeah, I remember that time. It was really hard. It was really hard. Here's what worked for me. Just like, fucking thank God. Okay. I didn't break my child forever kind of thing. It's just like, no, it's going to be okay.
Two things pop into my mind. Most recently, I'm getting back into investing, portfolios, trading, stock market stuff. I jumped into this program, and it was like basically teaching you how to build your own portfolio from top to bottom, making outsized returns, whatnot. And the system works really well if your emotions are under control. And it was a fantastic mirror to myself that, wow, there was multiple times I would have just done amazingly if I just sat on my butt and did nothing, and my
Yeah.
own emotions, my anxiety, everything just caught up, and it just ruined it.
Mhm.
And so after doing this, I realized, okay, I need to get more grounding and to figure this. And just recently, one of the guys in the program I've become very good friends with, he lives like an hour away in a city near me. We meet up once in a while. And I messaged him, I had an idea, something about an accountability partner. And I was typing it out, and I typed out, I just had a really stupid idea. And then I stopped myself and I was like, why is it stupid? It's
Mhm.
just an idea. Like, where is this coming? Like, why was the first thing I thought this is going to be stupid? But let's try, instead of saying, I have an idea, maybe it'll land, maybe it won't, but
Yep.
realizing like, oh wow, I'm criticizing myself way faster instinctively more than I should be in those moments. And the other one was that I'm not married, no kids yet. But I've spoken to my father a number of times about this. He lost his father when he was very young, about 12 years old.
Mm.
And I forget where the conversation came from, but he mentioned something about, raising kids, you're kind of just figuring it out as you go. And my first thought was, how the hell did we survive as a species if we had to just refigure it out, reinvent the wheel every single time we had like something? There's no way we got this far. We're like, no kid has to rediscover mathematics and science just to try to get like, no, you learn from somebody else. So him saying you just figure it out as you go sounded to me a lot like, oh, like there may not have been a lot of people around to give you the advice to have been there.
Mhm.
And that this is the whole idea of the podcast, is that like rebuilding the village, like it takes a
Yeah.
village to raise a child. And why are we not? What's happening on a global scale that we're producing so many people and so many different facets of life, or having these problems that hundreds of years ago probably weren't as big of an issue because the structure of society and the group of things like you mentioned before, how like babies, somebody somewhere, like mom, dad, aunt, uncle, cousin, somebody was like interacting with that kid at all times.
Mhm.
And now they're just being left their own devices, literally
Yeah.
iPads and TV and things like that at home, that they're not getting the attention. And then when they turn into young adults, people wonder what the hell happened. And it's been fascinating to see how ridiculously interconnected all of this is, and how essential it's becoming to get a better sense of community, structure, accountability, things like that. This was a thought that popped up earlier in our conversation, was the accountability piece, like how a lot of men really appreciate and enjoy and need that accountability, that there's something underneath that to say, that I see that to say is, you're not just you are like a combination of multiple different influences and parts of yourself that are all kind of fighting, I'll say fighting, but like competing for space in your head. And if you're in the wrong circumstances, the worst parts of you may come out with time. If you don't, I wouldn't say keep it under control, but keep it in a healthy check. If you're competitive and ambitious, you want to be around people who are also like in a healthy way competitive and ambitious. But if you're left to your own devices, you may just go like bloodthirsty competitive, trying to get it wherever it may be. Or if you have a propensity, like I have a bit of probably ADD, ADHD, something like that. And I know my capacity to just go on, to work hard when I'm more focusing on a project. I could just go all in, and I can just lose 12 hours to video games.
Sure.
And I have to be like, all right, I need to make sure I can contain this energy in the right path.
Mhm.
And having some kind of accountability externally through friends, through family, through people like that, a men's group, it dramatically keeps me on track. And for a long time, and I think a lot of men have the same thing, the feeling of, why can't I just be my own self-contained leader, coach, like mentor by myself?
Yeah.
It's like, we did not evolve for that. Like, we did not, that is not at all how we're operate. We're like, there's a reason these large companies have a C-suite, multiple guys, multiple women working together as a mastermind, as a group, to keep each other in check. Because like the
Mhm.
CEO might wake up one day, you know what? We're going to do this crazy, stupid idea. Just with two or three other people, like, no, we're not. We're going to sit down, see where it's coming. You kind of, okay, you know what? I thought about it. It's a good point. But recognizing that we are communal, we're all social creatures that need the people around us to help bring out the best in us and contain the more impulsive, nonsensical, immature parts of us that are always going to be there.
Yeah. Two things I can tie in here. One, I call it the myth of the lone wolf. that we're particularly fed here in the States, that there's this idea that the lone wolf is like the pinnacle of man, oh, he doesn't need anyone. He's just tough. It kind of dovetails into the rugged kind of individualistic cowboy, right? He's just, oh yeah, he's so tough. He doesn't need anyone. Like I talked about, this is literal in nature. The lone wolf dies faster.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
That's the wolf that was kicked out of the pack, and it will die faster. It will not survive as long. And I think people are the same way, right? They have so many stats around how important connection is and how it builds resiliency in our lives. Like, there's some research that came out from a book that's like literally just being part of a social club of any kind extends your life, reduces your likelihood of dying in the next year by 50%. I think that it was a pretty stunning stat, just being connected. And so this whole lone wolf thing, again, it's the man boy patriarchy really damaging men, that this idea that, oh, you should never need anyone. You should just be tough. You should figure it out all on your own. It's all, honestly, it's just bullshit. And then that's dovetailed in some pretty significant ways with, again, just we're taught that not needing anyone, not being in community is so tough, or is so the way to be as men. And it's just not. What we discover is men who are connected, they become more trustable, they make more money, they have better relationships, because when it's just you, actually, this is what I meant to say is, this is another big thing I do with men, is I do shadow work with men. And
I was going to ask about that.
The whole idea of shadow work is, the joke is you can't see your own shadow. What? What shadow? What shadow? Right? But you look at me and you're like, dude, you got a huge shadow right there. Right? And it's through your eyes I get to see parts of myself I'm not normally aware of. And so I get to, oh, wow, yeah, that my desire to do that thing, actually, that wasn't coming out of my grounded, open, attuned, sensitive place. That was coming from the part of, I really don't want to look stupid. So, I made this judgment call or whatever, whatever it is. And lo and behold, not always the case, but oftentimes the case, that I don't want to look stupid traces back to some wounding we have from when we were a kid, right? Some young part of us that is trying to assert itself as an adult, even though it's a kid. And that shadow work is another huge part of what makes group work, like a men's group, so powerful, because I have had this experience, Michael, where it's like, well, either the 8 of you are all wrong in what you're reflecting to me, or maybe my viewpoint, idea, conception here is wrong. Yes. So which one's more likely? It's like, oh, well, hey, in this instance, because I love and trust you guys and I believe in you, I'm going to trust you're probably right. There's something I'm not seeing here. And that has been revolutionary for me. And it's not even always negative things. I see this a lot for men who tend to have a lot of self-esteem issues or self-loathing or fierce inner critics, that they're like, no, I'm still blah, 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 blah. And it's the group that's like, no, actually you have changed. Here's why. We can see it. And again, it's like, whoa, well, either you guys are lying to me. Why would you lie to me? Or my image of myself is no longer correct. And that's, again, one of the many transformative things I've experienced in group and helped men experience as well.
I've definitely had those moments before. And I can recall the first time I think I really caught it. It wasn't really in a men's group, but it was the most recent relationship I was in. It fell apart. But the first night that I met her was on like a Halloween bar crawl. And it was me and a buddy meeting up with a whole group of girls for all this stuff and whatever it was. And we got in a conversation, we're talking. I hadn't been in a relationship prior to that for like 5-6 years. And we're talking, conversation's going great. She's laughing at my corny jokes. She's, we're kind of like just feeling each other out slowly. We're late in the night. It's like 2:00 in the morning. We're in a bar. Like, okay, we're going to get going. We're going to like pass out, like in a ditch soon if we don't get out of here, go back to an apartment and go to sleep. And I went into the bathroom and I was like, went to use the bathroom, washing my hands, and I was looking down and I look up in the mirror and my first thought was, oh God, you look like shit. What, you look gross. And I stopped myself and I was like, whoa, no. Like, this is the face that this girl's been laughing with, talking with, smiling at, interacting with for the past 3 hours. I don't I'm not listening to this shit right now.
Yeah.
Like, because either you actually are Quasimodo, or the past 5-6 girlfriends and everyone telling you you are, a handsome, good-looking guy, are like, who's really the correct one here? You by yourself, or the
Yeah.
thousands of times you've been, and you have to constantly check that inner voice, that inner ego. And I think the counterpoint that pops, the counter idea, the thing that pops up to the trust in the group, I suppose it works better when you have a small enough group, because you can still allow individual voices to be heard. Because there is always this fear that you might look at major political movements or things throughout history where it's like, well, they were a group of people that did some terrible things that they all thought they were doing the right thing. But I guess the nuance there is in the fact that, well, this is a small group of people that are not afraid to speak openly versus giant group of people where one person's in charge and everyone's afraid to challenge the status quo. It's a very big difference there. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Most groups I find that work best, no more than 10 men. That's like the most I see sustainable long-term groups working with, because just, depending on how frequently you're meeting, it's just hard to get that many voices in. If you have more men than that, it can be hard to find a space big enough for that. There's other types of groups I lead that are, more oriented to larger things, but that's different than what I'm kind of talking about in terms of a men's group here. Of we meet and we're all bringing our voice in. Some weeks it's some men more than others, but there tends to be a rhythm. And what I found is just, about 10 is the most that, a consistent group can hold, unless you can meet for 4 hours at a time, which most men I know can. It's maybe 2 hours is a good chunk of time for a men's group. So you're getting 4 hours a month. And, if every man's just doing a 5-10 minute check-in, that time goes really fast. If you start getting up to, 12, 15, 20 men, it's not going to happen. And there is a level of intimacy, I think, that is really cultivated in smaller groups. That can be really potent.
Yeah, and I guess the preventing factions from forming within there, or the wrong person taking up too much space. If they feel like it's like charismatic, it's not the right word, but yeah, if the group gets big enough, eventually they're going to start looking for more dominant ideas to become the prevailing narrative to follow, rather than keeping the individual in check, in view. Absolutely. This has been an awesome conversation. Where can we find your work? Where can we find your content?
Yeah, totally. Easiest way to stay in touch with me and kind of keep up with everything I'm up to is at my website, evolutionary.men. So it's not .com, it's actually .men. And on there you can find my podcast, programs I lead, workshops I lead, the retreats I lead, the whole gamut. If you want to experience a group or get connected or get some coaching too, I do all that. And I love supporting guys. I haven't quite created this Create Your Own Men's Group program yet, but I love supporting guys in that. So if you have questions about anything we talked about, of how do I find men or what kind of structure do I use, just reach out on my contact form. I'm very open. It's my mission, is every man should be in a men's group. So I will foster and facilitate that in any way I can. And it's just improved my life so much, and so many of the men I've worked with, that it's one of the lowest hanging fruits I think any man can really jump towards right now to grab and really alter the course of your life.
Fantastic. Jason, thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Michael.
Thank you for joining us today. If you found us informative, thought-provoking, or learned something new, please leave a review or a comment and tell a friend about the podcast. Feedback means the world to me, as I want to make this the best possible podcast that it can be, and to help others identify the causes of and solutions to problems in their own lives and villages. Until next time, let's keep working on rebuilding the village.